What is up, guys? It is your boy Sunil. Thank you so much for tapping in to So Real Sports Talk. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Rich Madrid. So for those of you that follow Rich on Twitter, you know this guy gets into epic Twitter battles, and I am a fan of it. So I thought I'd invite him on the show, give him an opportunity to go full throttle on everybody without any interruptions. So thank you very much, Rich, for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time. How you doing this morning?
I'm good, Sunil. Thanks for having me. This is great. I love doing this kind of stuff. So
beautiful, man. Well, hopefully we could continue to do it. But just to start out, Rich, I know you're a big guy into football film. But can you give us a little bit of just a quick background of your relationship with football, how you got into it, and how you became so knowledgeable in watching tape and the X's and O's?
Yeah, I guess my football journey goes way back to when I was a little kid growing up in LA. My parents were big Rams fans, and they would never take me to any of the primetime games. So one of the first primetime games that I remember was the 49ers Rams one, where I think it was John Taylor had like 3 touchdowns or whatever. And I was really pissed that I didn't get to go. And even though I was only like probably 4 or 5 years old at the time, and I was like, I'm just going to root against my parents. And this team looks fun. They look good, and they have a lot of players that ended up being Hall of Famers and stuff, and were really good and elite. And it was just more fun rooting for a good team because the Rams at the time weren't very good. And I do think that was the season that the Rams and 49ers played in the NFC Championship. But for the vast majority of my childhood, the Rams just weren't good. So I just started rooting for the 49ers then because, as a little kid, you want to be associated with winners and not losers. And it was more fun that way. And then I started playing the game, as a teenager and things like that, and played in high school way back in the day. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I got reconnected with some of my old coaches and just started talking ball with them and getting their perspective on the game, 2 decades later. And it kind of just grew from there. They sent me a lot of resources, a lot of their old playbooks, just relearning a lot of things I learned when I was a kid playing the game. So it kind of just rekindled that passion that I had for it. About the only thing I haven't done is coached. I just haven't had the time, but it's been fun learning new perspectives and learning how the game's evolved over the years, and it's just really taken off since then.
Absolutely. And did you play offense or defense when you were playing the game?
I played both. I played free safety and wide receiver.
Got you. Beautiful, man. Well, I love your takes on Twitter. And I know you're all about the X's and O's and backing it up with the film tape. So we're definitely going to delve in and use that brain of yours today. So probably the Twitter debate that actually our paths crossed was the Shanahan versus McVay debate. And just for everybody that watches the show, know I'm a big Shanahan. So I was obviously defending Shanahan, but you kind of came with some nuke moves and it shut me down as far as, just the overall debate and, and all that kind of stuff. But let's kind of get into it. So obviously, when I guess the similarities between these two is they're both, offensive geniuses, both young guys that the league kind of captured and, kind of put on a pedestal. They've done a lot to change how offensive's played in the league right now. So before we go into who's better, why don't you give us some of the similarities and kind of like compare and contrast?
Well, the most obvious similarities are their offensive schemes. They're both a wide zone running team. Now, McVay does a little bit different things in the running game. I think he simplifies it a little more than Shanahan does. In McVay's scheme in the wide zone, they really don't care if they get to the edge or not. And so most of the time you're going to see their tackles, kick the defensive end out or whoever the end man on the line of scrimmage out is. And that's going to change how the running back reads the cuts. They really want to get north and south quicker than Shanahan does. Shanahan's running game is a little more patient, takes a little more time to develop and getting to the edge because they really want to get to the edge and then go. So that's, probably the big difference there. And then in how they employ their personnel groups. Shanahan's a big 21 personnel guy, and McVay's a big 11 personnel. And now those numbers have kind of shifted for those two, but everyone associates McVay with 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers, and things like that. So those are kind of the two main differences. As far as similarities, I mean, we both know that they grew up in the same scheme together. They grew up coaching, I think, under I don't know if it was John Gruden together. They ended up there somehow. But Shanahan did hire McVay to be a quality control coach with the Redskins, back in 2010, whenever he went there. And so that's where they started coaching together. And they go into more detail in this on the Pete Schrager podcast that they were both on a couple of weeks ago. But that's how they've kind of evolved together, and they've been known as these two guys that run the same scheme or almost the same style coach and things like that. So it's really interesting to see how they've diverged really since 2017 when they became head coaches the same year.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously they ended up in the same division, which is pretty remarkable as far as rival coaches. So when we were discussing it on Twitter, obviously, the sentimental 49er fans are behind Shanahan because there's so many flashes of greatness when you see what the Shanahan office is capable of, given the right pieces and health and all that kind of stuff. However, the argument that you made that really is undeniable and really hard to refute, although I'm going to try it some way, somehow, one of these days, is just the overall success. It's undeniable that, McVay's tenure with the Rams has just had more constant success as far as overall making the playoffs and winning seasons and so on and so forth. Even though the height is equal, right? The height has been, both of them made it to the Super Bowl and lost in the Super Bowl. Yeah. Just overall longevity of winning, McVay is higher. So what do you, point the finger to why McVay has had so much success as far as winning, and what's the issue with Shanahan and why he's not able to have that same success?
Well, the main thing is they came into different situations. McVay, a long time ago, I made the point that McVay seemed kind of like Harbaugh to me, where he came into a team that was already loaded and stacked and just introduced the element of good coaching. That doesn't mean he's not a bad coach, but so that was the first year when he inherited the Rams. But they also, since then, have made a lot of acquisitions, have given up a lot of draft capital, and for other high quality players, they brought in Jalen Ramsey, and I forget some of the other guys. They had Brandon Cooks for a year.
Right.
They gave up significant capital for him.
Earlier, Aqib Talib was somebody that they brought in.
Yeah. And yeah, I forgot about him, but yeah, he was another guy. And they brought in, didn't they bring in Ndamukong Suh for a couple of years?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And these are all guys that they swung for the fences for, they got, and they made a Super Bowl run, and they've had 4 winning seasons because of it. Now, does Shanahan get some leeway with what he inherited? Yeah, I mean, he inherited a largely untalented roster that had few guys that were worth keeping around, outside of Buckner, Ward, and Staley and Jimmy Tart, and I think there might have been a couple others, but they just weren't a talented roster. So Shanahan right away had to rebuild what he had, and that's understandable. But in the process of rebuilding, they've made a lot of questionable decisions, I think, paying top dollar to running backs, paying top dollars to fullbacks, despite the production you get. I mean, that's money that you can allocate to other areas. And then the other thing they've done that I think is not indicative of a good coaching staff sometimes is bringing in players that have had previous injury histories that are a higher risk. That doesn't mean that they're injury prone. It just means that, for certain injuries like ACL tears and things like that, guys are at a higher risk of re-injuring.
Right.
And then sure enough, Quan Alexander got hurt, Dee Ford got hurt, and who knows if he's ever going to play again. I mean, I feel bad for the guy, but it is what it is, and they should have probably looked elsewhere. I mean, when you can't deny that Dee Ford didn't have a a significant impact when he played, but he's not playing, and he didn't
Right.
play last season. And so these are some of the decisions they've made that are questionable in terms of roster building. They invested capital to move up for Dante Pettis in the second round, and that didn't pan out for whatever reason. I mean, sometimes you just can't predict if a guy's going to pan out or not, but it really just hasn't. It's been a combination of, like, I think, being unlucky and not really having an understanding of some of the positions they value. And they haven't gotten a lot of it right, and some of it they have. They've found Brandon Ayuk, they found Javon Kinlaw. These guys are going to be probably elite players. They finally got their quarterback, but that's another situation where they've waited 5 years to do anything significant. So
Right.
there's just a lot of differences in how the two coaches view roster building, and I think McVay's aligns more with what winning teams in the NFL do right now, and that's swing for the fences right now, because you don't know what the league's going to be like in 5 years, what your team's going to look like 5-10 years from now. You don't know what the league's going to look like 5 or 10 years from now in terms of rule changes and things like that, and evolution of the game, and offenses and defenses changing all the time. So McVay is just seems every year they're giving up more draft capital than you realize they had. I mean, they just gave up 2 first-round picks to get Matt Stafford.
Right.
Because
and
they
that's
had to.
and that's something that's super interesting, is just that philosophy. And it isn't something that I feel like a lot of teams around the league are doing. It seems like the LA Rams are doing it intentionally, where they're just passing on the draft. They're like, you know what, we're going to just take known quantities versus rolling the dice and trying to decide that maybe this guy could be a player in our team. How do you feel about that? Because the theme is, or what people are saying, like, that are, I guess, anti that type of philosophy, are like, eventually it's going to add up when you have, a top heavy, I guess, roster where all the money is invested in a couple of players, and you don't have that depth. But it doesn't seem like it's caught up with the Rams, at least, since John McVay's been doing this. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, not yet. I mean, outside of the player acquisitions, a lot of it is their coaching staff. They have guys who, who have gone on and become head coaches elsewhere too. So they're the philosophy for how they run, how they lead their players, and how they manage that organization is similar to the 49ers. It just hasn't panned out for the 49ers yet. But, Zach Taylor became a head coach, albeit he's not a very good one with the Bengals, but he's a guy that was first plucked to be a head coach. And then, they hired Wade Phillips for a couple of seasons. He's a really good defensive coordinator, elite defensive coordinator. They let him go for something better, and Brandon Staley, who comes off the Vic Fangio tree. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't keep him around because he got a head coaching job after one season of running basically the number one defense. So
right.
They do a lot of things right, and that's not to say that the 49ers aren't, because I think a lot of coaches on the 49ers, they've been plucked too. Saleh, LaFleur went with him, and elsewhere. There's a lot of coaches in that tree back from their Washington days that are significant contributors or head coaches on coaching staffs around the league. So that's undeniable. But, the Rams, for whatever reason, it just hasn't caught up with them, giving up all the draft picks, giving up all the good coaches. It's mind-boggling how it hasn't, but it really is indicative of a league that is win now. You get guys that are capable of winning now and coaching to win now, and that's the difference. I mean, it's great for longevity for Shanahan, but 2 more seasons of sub 500 winning seasons are going to be
it's going to be hard to
it's going to be hard to keep him around. And I don't think Jed York is going to start losing his patience with that too. I mean,
and the fan base. I mean, you only have so much credit with the fan base, but if we keep seeing, we keep thinking that the Rams window is going to close shut, and then now they just got Matthew Stafford, and I know there's a lot of delusional 49er fans that don't realize how good Matthew Stafford actually is and how he's going to make that team so much better. But that just extended their window to be elite for another, maybe 2-3 years minimum. And they still have Ramsey, they still have Donald and unfortunately, Cam Akers got injured, which was another up and coming star they hit on in the draft. But it seems like the Rams are going to be there for a while. Yeah,
I think they will too. I mean, injuries kind of caught up with them in 2019, and they still finished 9-7 and missed the play. They would have been, I think, the seventh playoff team in that scenario.
Yeah, they would have made it if it was the same type of system right now.
So they're doing a lot of things right. It's not to say that the 49ers aren't. It's just their philosophies are so different. And right now for Shanahan, it's not working out. I mean, you can say it's unlucky with the injuries to Garoppolo and things like that, and Bosa and everybody that got hurt in the one game. But at what point do you start? They got guys getting hurt in off-season program now. They had guys getting hurt in the off-season program last year, before camp and everything. And at what point do you start looking at how things off the field are affecting them and what they're doing? I mean, they got in trouble for basically violating the OTA rules or the rookie mini camp rules or whatever it was, and had to give up a week of OTAs, which I think Shanahan canceled anyways. And, he wasn't really lying about that, but I don't really care. But, that they have to take an honest, hard look at what they're doing with roster construction and see where it's working and where it isn't, and
you can't keep going off of potential, right?
Eventually, they can't keep doing what they're doing. Yeah, they need results. They need guys that don't have previous injury histories and things like that, because you never know how it's going to pan out. And so far, it hasn't panned out. Well, the Rams don't go get guys with injury histories. They just find ways to get elite players.
Right. I think the tweet that nuked me on Twitter was, you will never hear Sean McVay say, or a Rams team say, if healthy, they would have won, right? They're just winning regardless of who's on the field, because and a lot of that has to, you can't, Shanahan, at the end of the day, there's two major critiques that I, even as a Shanahan stan, have to, you can't defend. One is that quarterback room, not having a plan B behind Jimmy Garoppolo, especially after 2018, where you already had a season-ending injury. And then two is the inability to change around the health of the team, because he came from an organization in Atlanta that didn't have these same injury issues. So there's definitely something that he could have done to fix it. Yeah. And Rich, there's a question that we got about you personally. Varuna saying, I love your tweets. How can you have such a thick skin and put out facts when people blindly criticize?
I try to be cordial and respectful with everyone I talk to online, and sometimes that doesn't work out. I'll be the first to admit that I can be pretty
prickly,
pretty hot-headed sometimes, and I'm trying to change a lot of that, because it's just not worth it, man. Everybody's just trying to learn and get information and and have a good time and talk with like-minded fans and things. So sometimes it's hard to keep that all in perspective. But thick skin, I don't know. I don't really think too much about that. I grew up with a father who was hard on me, albeit I love him very much, and he's like been my rock my entire life, and encouraged me to pursue things that I normally probably wouldn't have, even if I'd wanted to or not wanted to. But and having an older brother who picked on me a lot, and then I served 10 years in the military. You just learn to put in perspective what's important to you and what's not. And, the things that are most important to me, I'm very protective of, and I might not have thick skin. I might go through the roof if things pertaining to my family are in jeopardy, or friends or whatever. But arguing with people online, it's just, I don't know. It's just a thing we all do. And at the end of the day, it doesn't have any bearing on where we're going in our lives. The fans,
I feel like you enjoy it a little more than you're putting on, Rich. Yeah, I feel like
sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. I won't lie. I mean, it's a lot of the time, especially over the last year, for a lot of us, it's the only interaction we've had with anybody.
That's true.
Because of COVID and everything outside of work, I have friends at work that I talk football with, but they're not like, they're diehard 49er fans, but they're not like diehard, like, oh, rah, let's talk about X's and O's and debate players and things like that. No, we don't do that. But, so it's just a different kind of interaction with people online when you have a a decent sized platform to talk about these things. And so it makes it fun sometimes, and sometimes, people can get hot headed like me, and it makes it not fun. But, we're all at the end of the day just rooting for the same team and want to learn the same thing. So,
For sure.
don't people can criticize all they want. Most of the time I just laugh, and some people have challenged me and, changed my way of thinking about certain things. And those people know who they are because I've reached out to them and talked with them. So, it's but bottom line is, at the end of the day, it's another person on that screen or behind that phone. And, the people don't deserve to be blasted for anything that they put out and things like that. So it's just, a lot of it just shouldn't matter. In the moment, it's fun to talk about and have a good time. But at the same time, like, don't let it affect your daily life. Like, it doesn't affect how I interact with my family and friends, and I leave it all online or whatever. And
It's just Twitter.
People should do the same thing. Yeah, it's just Twitter, man. 90% of the population gets their news from, or 10% of the population gets their news from other sources, whether it's sports or non-sports related, and 90% of the population isn't even on social media. So it just doesn't matter. Just, if people criticize, they criticize with all they want.
Well said, man. So let's move on. Obviously, big news for the 49ers. Yesterday, Fred Warner signed. They've signed Fred Warner to a 5-year, I believe, $95 million deal, making him the highest paid linebacker in history. Well deserved. One thing that I wanted to talk to you about is you kind of contrasted or compared him to Patrick Willis and kind of his ascension as well, and that was getting some critiques on the internet. But can you go over, one, because I think you're high on Fred Warner, correct?
Oh, he's probably my favorite player right now.
Beautiful. So let's go delve into what causes him to be so elite, and then if you can also bring in, some of those similarities that you see with Patrick Willis, who obviously is in 49er, folklore as far as how great he was for our team.
Yeah, well, I think, for one thing, I think a lot of fans are nostalgic for Pat, and it's perfectly understandable. I think the first jersey I owned when I could afford it growing up was a Patrick Willis jersey in my early 20s. So I love Patrick Willis. I loved when he came out. I loved how he played the game early on, and then Fangio's scheme just elevated him to Hall of Fame status if he wasn't already there before then. So you can't say enough about the guy. Now, Fred Warner, in my opinion, is on the same level. In year three, after year three, for both guys, I think Warner was at Willis's level after his third year. And I think he's just going to continue to get better and better. And he's not even in his prime. Hopefully the injuries and things like that don't catch up with him like they kind of did with Patrick at the end of his career, and kind of force him into retirement. But they're on the same trajectory. When you have to kind of dig around, but the things are out there, and you can go watch, on YouTube and probably some other places, early Patrick Willis games in his rookie year. And you can see that Fred Warner does all the same stuff. Fred Warner was calling plays in his first game. So was Patrick Willis. They both have great range. Patrick Willis, I think, ran a 4.4. I don't know if Warner was quite that fast, but you've seen Warner's range in the last 3 years and how he covers, between the numbers. He's everywhere, and that's why they ask him to do everything. I mean, the 49ers are a defensive scheme where when they go empty, but the offense goes empty, the 49ers defense is putting Warner on the number 3 in trips. I mean, teams are going to send out a nickel or a dime defender or put a safety on somebody like that, and with the way teams move around that number 3 receiver, a number 3 could be Julio Jones, or it could be Hollywood Brown on the Ravens, and Warner's going to stay with them stride for stride across the field.
Right. Most quarterbacks would see a linebacker line up against one of their receivers, and that's where they're going. They're changing the route that's where you're going with the ball. But you can't do that with Warner.
Yeah. The league is like majoring in 3-by-1. It's everybody is running more 3-by-1 than ever before. So
can you explain a little bit what that means, 3-by-1?
Yeah, 3-by-1 is trips 3 receivers to one side and 1 receiver to the single side, or single receiver side, basically, or tight end in a inline formation. But basically, it's just a trips formation look, whether it's a bunch, a stack alignment, or traditional, spread out across the field. And Warner is that basically they call him the final 3 defender. And it doesn't matter who the number 3 is. Warner's responsibility is either playing a wall technique where he doesn't let number 3 run across the field, or he's carrying number 3 across the field. Because what teams like to do with the number 3 receiver is run them, deep across, like on a deep crosser or whatever. And every time Warner is that guy. He runs step for step with Tyler Lockett, who's one of the best deep threats the league has. I mean, he did a baseball speed turn with Hollywood Brown in that Ravens game in the rain on a soaked field, and stayed with him stride for stride in that 2019 game and broke up a pass. And even when he's not like matching up man coverage like that, or a man match in a man match scheme, where basically man match is if a guy runs into your area, then you're running with him no matter what he does. His responsibility is eliminating that middle threat receiver. So like against the Browns, I tweeted out a play yesterday where he basically gets in the throwing lane for the number 3. So Baker Mayfield bypasses him, tries to go to the number 2, and Warner just slides across to the number 2 and removes that one. And by that point, Mayfield's scrambling and has to throw the ball out of bounds. I mean, that's just what Fred Warner is. He understands the game at a level I don't think people realize, and I don't think people truly appreciate how much he does in the course of a game that you don't see like that. On the
and that's kind of what,
angle. Yeah,
I'm sorry. I won't. Go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick. On the broadcast angle for that Browns play, you don't see him do any of that because it's off screen, because it's deeper downfield, like 15, 20 yards. And that's a lot of what he's doing. He's removing a lot of options and forcing quarterbacks to look elsewhere. And that's, a good chunk of the reason why the 49ers pass rush was so good in 2019 is because he's allowing those guys to get home. That's not to say that Bosa and everybody isn't good and can't get home in less than 2.5 seconds, because they can. But when you can't get home in that amount of time, because not every elite pass rusher can do that, having a guy like Warner who can lock down the middle of the field is key, because then it just allows everybody to do other things, and you don't have to worry about getting another safety out there to do something. Linebackers that can cover are not easy to find, and that's where Warner separates himself.
And that's what's really interesting, because the difference between Warner and Willis. Obviously, Willis was a top 15. I think he went 11th, right, for the 49ers the year that they drafted him, and Warner went in the 3rd round, right? So, yeah. So obviously, usually that's because physically imposing, he maybe didn't look at the athlete that they want, the prototypical middle linebacker. So, and you kind of alluded to it, he's making up for a lot of maybe where he's not physically as talented as other players in his position with his football IQ, correct? And
absolutely.
And you say you see that through the tape.
And because when he played at BYU, he wasn't an off the ball linebacker. He was a hybrid, like safety / outside edge defender type, played in that type of role in the box. So he has a lot of knowledge about playing coverage and, how to read play development and things like that. He's got one of the fastest triggers I've ever seen when he sees, even going back to his rookie season last night, I went and watched like the first game against Minnesota and tweeted out some plays. Like, he's just very quick. When he recognizes it, he goes, and he recognizes it, right 99% of the time. And that was Willis to me. I mean, in my opinion, right now, Warner looks faster on the field than Willis did in year 3. And it's just, the game is different. I mean, Willis had the range, but, teams weren't throwing it all over the yard like they are now, where a guy like Warner comes in and locks that down. But, that's not to take anything away from Pat, because he has, there was his game against the Cardinals or the Jets or whatever his rookie season. He had that pick where he just basically dropped deep into a zone down the sideline and picked off a pass over the middle or between the numbers or whatever. I can't remember where it was, but he started out like at the hash and just ended up in his spot where the quarterback put it at the numbers or just outside, and he picked it. Like he just got good extension, jumped up and picked it. Like I'm like, man, I didn't think we'd ever see something like that again. And then,
Right.
You get guys like Bobby Wagner, who's kind of like the bridge between Willis and Warner. And then Warner comes in and does that 10 times better and does everything, I think a lot more for the defense than Willis did at the time, because it's just a different league than it was 10 years ago.
I mean, having that middle linebacker with that coverage just gives you so much freedom as a defensive coordinator, because you don't have to bring in, like you said, an extra corner. You could leave kind of like the package that you have out there. And the one thing we didn't even talk about, you're talking about just on field, what he's able to do. He also brings a high character type player in your locker room, and one of the an elite leadership style, which is amazing to have. I think it was a no-brainer re-sign for the 49ers. I'm glad that they gave him the money, and even if maybe there's some issues with cap in the future, I think it's well worth it to spend it on a guy like this. This wasn't a mistake of a contract in any stretch, I would say.
No, and when you have a guy who's arguably probably a top 10 player in the league and probably a top 3 defensive player, arguably, you have to pay him.
Right. Absolutely. Now, another guy that you, I think you're higher on than maybe a lot of the fan base is Javon Kinlaw, right? So he was obviously picked with the first round pick a couple years ago. And some people are looking at him and not seeing, I guess, obviously it's coming off of kind of like a swap for DeForest Buckner. And, 49ers just saw how much production we got out of Buckner those years he was with the team. So can you tell us a little bit about what you see in Kinlaw and what you think his ceiling could be as a player, and especially here with the 49ers?
Yeah, I don't know if we obviously don't know if Kinlaw is going to reach Buckner status, but Buckner didn't reach Buckner status right away either. There was a little bit of development in there, and took him a little bit to get his feet under him. And I think Kinlaw was battling maybe a previous injury last season too, but he is another guy that when he's on, he eats space for the defensive line, so he can create one-on-one matchups for other players. And he's a guy that when he gets a one-on-one matchup, I wouldn't bet on the offensive lineman blocking him very easily. It's a matter of getting those matchups, and I think they're still trying to figure that out with him. But when they do figure it out, having the depth and the rotation to keep him fresh, I think they're going to get a lot more of those matchups later on in games where Kinlaw's going to win them one-on-one, just because he's so big and strong. I mean, he was pushing guys around, at South Carolina and in the Alabama game they played and some other games. But he's gonna come around, and when he takes off, it's just going to be that much better. So I think fans need to be a little more patient with him than they're wanting to be because, of his first round pick status and things like that. But they really need to be patient with that one because as we even saw with Buckner and Armstead, like those guys didn't come around right away, and then they did when the conditions were right. And Kinlaw will too. So Kinlaw has a chance to be a very special player, and I think he's going to end up being a very special player. I don't think they missed on that one.
So I think one of the big critiques is, or one of the, I guess the thought process behind Kinlaw is he seems pretty well developed in at least the run game as far as being able to be a run stopper. But where people are seeing weaknesses is kind of what you're talking about in the pass rush game. It seems like he doesn't have very many moves, which obviously is going to be developed, with Kusrik and, at the NFL level. But what are you seeing, at least on tape, that shows you flashes or at least gives you the idea that he can develop that aspect of his game? And that is something that, is ascending for him as well.
Yeah, I think one of his best games was the Saints game. You can go watch that one and how he pushed some of those Saints offensive linemen around. But yeah, he was a guy who, when he came out, didn't have maybe more than 2 or 3 pass rush moves. So from that standpoint, yeah, some of that has to be developed. But Where he's going to win in the passing game is, again, eating up maybe two offensive linemen because he rushes a certain gap or whatever that isn't protected. And it's going to free up other guys to get one-on-one matchups and things like that. And so that's where you can't discount the value that someone brings. Even if he's not winning some of those matchups with his, lack of moves or whatever, those are going to develop. If he gets a guy in a bull rush situation, it's over for that lineman. And that was the case last season. And when he can't necessarily get to the quarterback like that, he's a guy that can, with his long frame, influence a pass and bat a pass down. So I think you'll see a lot more of that. But I don't necessarily think he's going to be a liability in the passing game as far as being a pass rusher. If they rush him from the interior, which they're going to, he's going to eat up, at least two blockers on a lot of occasions, I think.
And what, in your estimation, usually how many years does it take a lineman to really come into their own and start actually showing the type of player that they're going to be?
About 2 or 3 years, if they're not, an Aaron Donald type. I mean, I don't remember much of Aaron Donald's early first 2 years, but I don't remember him getting a lot of the hype that he gets now. So even Buckner, I mean, it's, Buckner came in 16, and
right. It wasn't until like the 2019 season really that he really 18-19, yeah.
18-19, yeah. And then that's just the way it goes for a lot of guys. It's a scheme dependent. It's coaching dependent. Putting them in positions where they're best suited. Like, that's, I think, where they messed up with Solomon Thomas and making him a guy that they thought could be a pass rusher from the edge when he was never a pass rusher from the edge in college. He should have been an interior guy his whole career, and I think he would have been a lot better off. But I hope they don't make the same mistakes with Kinlaw, and I don't think they will. But I don't think I also think Kinlaw is a much better prospect than Thomas was coming out. But I think they'll be just fine. I don't think they're going to screw this one up.
I mean, and the one thing about Kinlaw that I really like is he seems like he has that motor as far as wanting to be better, right? He came in, you already noticeably different physique than he did the year before. And maybe some of that played the role as far as what you were saying. Maybe he wasn't as healthy as we thought last season. And just that person that is willing to put in the work, those are the type of guys that I think can flourish, especially since probably we have one of the best defensive line coaches in the league. So to be able to have somebody that's willing to put in the work, I imagine a big leap in year 2 and year 3 with Kinlaw as well. And I believe, he's going to be one of the pivotal pieces in why the defensive line is going to make its comeback. And just off one off, how good do you think this defensive line could be this season?
I think it's going to be pretty damn good with all the acquisitions they made and the depth that they have now. The Samson Ebukam signing was kind of weird to me because he's never been a guy that has been someone you think of as a productive pass rusher. Coincidentally, his best pass rushing snaps come in a wide 9 alignment, but he doesn't often rush from there. A lot of his pass rush reps come from just over the tackle, kind of like a 4 or 5 technique. And he, if he doesn't have that room to get going, then he doesn't win reps that often. So it was kind of a weird signing to me. But if you look at his athletic profile, I forget what website, but he is like a top tier athletic guy. So he has the athleticism that you're looking for to be an edge rusher. And maybe this scheme finally unlocks it, but
I think I saw Ebukam as more of because one of the things that the 49ers always got gashed by is the mobility of a quarterback. Even if they kept, if they shut down all the options, they covered well, and they got, some pressure onto the quarterback, that if they had a guy like Russell Wilson back there or Kyler Murray, they're breaking containment, and the 49ers really didn't have any ability to keep those type of quarterbacks in the pocket and tackle them for loss. I think Ebukam is geared towards that, to be kind of like the spy on the quarterback against mobile quarterbacks, because that's always been the Achilles heel of the 49ers. So that's what I more saw that signing for.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want a guy that can move around the line of scrimmage like that and contain things. But if he has to be a straight pass rusher and a 3 down guy, I don't think it's going to work out for them that well because he's going to get
Right.
blown up in the run game.
Yeah, yeah, but we shall see. I think they have a good, like a lot of great depth. Maybe obviously we have the superstars out there like a
Mhm.
Kinlaw and a Bosa, and Armstead. Hopefully, will perform the way that we think he can as well. But then they got a lot of guys like the Arden Keys, the Ebacoms. That
Mo
depth that
Hurts,
can Mo
yeah,
Hurts, yeah, that could just come in and like you said, keep these stars fresh. And if we could get anything out of D Ford, if he could play anything, especially at the end of the
yeah.
season or into the playoffs, we're looking at a pretty elite defensive line that, teams are going to really have to figure out a way to block these guys. It's going to help out all levels of the defense, I believe.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, this is a team that really hasn't missed outside of Solomon Thomas, where they kind of played him out of position. This is a team that really hasn't missed on defensive line talent. Even in 2017 and 2018, they brought guys in. I can't remember their names now that were not really contributors on the teams they were on and came in and contributed in their scheme. God, who am I thinking of? I can't even remember. But
What season are you talking about? Last season?
2017, 2018. Man,
Yeah, I'm not.
I don't remember, but they were good, solid contributors in a rotational role.
Mhm.
And then finding DJ Jones extremely late in the draft. They've never really missed on any defensive line prospects or signings outside of Thomas, which I think they royally screwed up. But
Right. That whole
um,
first round of the draft was pretty brutal looking
yeah,
back now.
I'm gonna look up
um,
that roster from 2017 real quick. That's gonna bug
sure.
me.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, I'm listening though.
Cassius Marsh is what
Yeah,
is
even
that?
Cassius Marsh was a good, rotational guy who basically went on to other teams based on what he did with the 49ers and didn't really maybe do a lot, but he was there.
And
Um,
Lalo said kind of what you were talking about, being an interior rusher. It's much different than an edge rusher. Interior guys usually take more time to develop. And as a fan base, we can't expect everybody to come out and just be a superstar right from the jump. A guy like Kinlaw, like we think, this year I feel like could be a really big year as far as seeing ascension. And by year 3, year 4, we could see like a super dominant player that really is, the anchor of our defensive line, for the years to come.
yeah, I think so too. I do think that's probably going to be uh, Bosa or Kinlaw. Bosa's a weird
Hopefully
one
both.
for me right now. I don't know if the injury thing is going to be an issue for him or if this is just hopefully it's something he gets past and never has to worry about again. But that family has a weird injury history.
He's just such an explosive player. I don't think your body's built to be that athletic and that explosive and that strong and
Yeah.
the type of frame that he has. It's kind of it just doesn't. Physics, I guess, is catching up to him every now and then, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So you might let's move on. Obviously this season we're getting George Kittle back, and I think George Kittle obviously is still well respected throughout the league. However, we haven't really been able to see him at his peak in it seems like a few years just due to injuries overall. So can you give us maybe a reminder for people that might be forgetting, especially going into the fantasy draft this year, and there's some other tight ends that are kind of ascending. The guy Waller out of the Raiders, and obviously with Kelsey and stuff like that. Give everybody a reminder of what makes George Kittle so unique. And then if you could talk about what makes George Kittle so unique specifically for a team like the 49ers that utilizes him differently than maybe other tight ends are utilized in other offenses.
Yeah, I think in the NFL right now it's Kelsey,
Kelsey.
or Kels or whatever he said is how he, but
Oh
everybody
yeah,
knows.
he did say that it's not
He said,
pronounced
"Well,
that
it's
way,
actually
right?
Kels." Everybody just calls me Kelsey. Whatever. It's him and Kittle, 1A and 1B, and the rest don't matter. I mean, Waller's been around for a while. He kind of broke out last season just due to circumstances surrounding the Raiders' offense, but I mean, he's not. It's not that he's bad. I just think Kittle and Kelsey are a league above everyone else in that position. And for Kittle's, I'll say this about Kelsey. Everyone just thinks that he's a receiving tight end and does whatever he does because it's the Chiefs offense, but the man can run block. He does not get enough credit for that. And he's always up there in run blocking grades and efficiency with Kittle. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. So he's up there as the league's best, and Kittle is right there with him. For Kittle specifically, he wasn't a guy who showed the nuance of running routes as a tight end in college, just because Iowa's offense is so run heavy and CJ Beathard was his quarterback. But when he came to the NFL, the first year he was good. He wasn't what he is now, obviously, but by year 2 for Kittle, you really saw the route running ability come into play, and he was doing things he wasn't doing in year 1 or even in college. So he's evolved as a route runner, and he's one of the best route runners that they have, and is probably one of the best route runners as a tight end in the league. Again, next to Kelsey, but that is what has really separated him. He's always been a monster in the run game. He was at Iowa, and he was. He has been in the NFL. It's just in the draft, you don't really look at things like that. Things move so fast in the news cycle that, when you see someone like Kittle, all you see is run blocking. You think they're not going to spend a high pick on a guy that just run blocks as a tight end. They want somebody with ability. Well, they got him, I think that it paid off on their end because I think they knew that he could develop into what he is. And no one else obviously took a chance on him until that late. So,
and especially in this type of offense, a guy like Kittle is invaluable because, like you said earlier, one thing about Kyle Shanahan, he loves running to the outside and to the edge. And if you have a guy like Kittle that could basically seal off that edge, it makes the run game. He makes the run game run. I mean, obviously in 2019 when he played most of the season, they were ranked number 2. And then, last season when he was injured most of the season, they dropped to 15th. And I think a lot of that had to do, obviously, the offensive line was a little bit suspect last season. But Kittle not being there, I think, played just as big of a role as any offensive lineman that wasn't there at that time.
Yeah, I think so, too. 2018 is where Kittle really established himself and separated himself as a run blocker. Everybody knows he broke the record receiving that year for tight ends. But don't underestimate his run blocking that season. And I think, a few games that stand out to me were the Cardinals game at home, the Packers game, and probably a few others. I wrote about, because I know this because I wrote about it at the time. And he's a monster. He pancakes guys left and right in the run game. There's one play in particular against Atlanta in 2019 where he drives that defender into the end zone. And then the camera pans to him and he's just laughing, because he just pancaked the hell out of the defender. It's just that's just like the infectious attitude that he brings and the dominance that he has. And
he wants to be a great blocker. He wants to be known for blocking.
He wants to be an enforcer on the field, even though his demeanor is like fun guy, like National Tight End Day, haha, funny type stuff. But he in the back of his mind, he's looking at you thinking he's going to destroy you, and he will.
Can you talk a little bit about his ability? He's part of the Yak Boys. What does he do that causes him to be so elite in gaining yards after contact?
Well, he's fast, obviously, and it's in the route running. I mean, we give Shanahan a lot of credit for scheming guys wide open, and I'm as much of a Shanahan as you are, but for someone like Kittle who understands, okay, I've got this guy with this leverage on me. I know how I can get open, and he does. And when necessarily you wouldn't think somebody would get open, against examples like against Ebukam in 2018 against the Rams, Kittle was just finding ways to get open on Samson Ebukam when he was covering him. Mm-hmm. He's very good at quickly reading defender leverage and knowing on the route, okay, if I do this, I can get open on this guy right here. And selling it and putting all his body and, basically putting his body into the route and selling out and getting open. It's almost like, in Shanahan's offense, it's kind of theatrical to watch these guys get open because they are doing a lot of things that you necessarily wouldn't notice on game day and how they get open. Like just it's an act. It's all like acting, and they're selling it really well.
Right.
And he does that. Like if you watch the touchdown he scored against the Cardinals on Halloween in 2019, where he threw what's his name to the ground twice. Watch how he gets open on that play specifically, and it's all an act, man. He just understands the nuance of leverage being played on him, coverage that they're showing, and where the space is to get open, and he gets it. And so that's how he gets all his yak, and he's just a hard, physical, fast runner.
Do you feel like in another system he would be just as elite, or do you think that it's the right combination of skill set, player, and scheme coach that is getting the unlocking who George Kittle actually is?
No, I think he would be elite in any scheme. When you see who the tight ends are that are good in the league, and you can see they'd be good in any scheme.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think the vast majority of teams have a tight end they can truly rely on like that. Some guys pan out for a few years. Kyle Rudolph, Zach Ertz. I think the Saints probably had one of the better tight ends.
And Cook?
Cooks? Yeah, Cook. I always want to say Cooks and Cook. I always get those mixed up, but yeah, and Cook. But they're hard to find, and so when you have them, you as much as it's like not a position that's valued, having someone like Kittle, who lines up all over the field, that's what Shanahan wants, and that's where the value is.
And you're starting to see it. Obviously, Atlanta got Pitts in this year's draft, and you're starting to see these more athletic these athletes start moving into the tight end role, because it's pretty much an unguardable position once they get to so elite, because they're going to be too fast for that linebacker and too big for that safety or corner that's going to cover them. So it becomes just a matchup nightmare for defensive coordinators to have somebody as elite as Kittle.
And that's a good point, because when you have Kittle, who's a tight end, and you line him up in line as a tight end, now the defense has to account for staying in their base personnel. Well, if Shanahan catches you in your base personnel and you get a linebacker on Kittle, I mean, he's going to pound you in the running game to that side, or he's going to get a 50-yard gain or something out of it in the passing game. I mean, they're just so good at keeping teams in their base personnel defensive packages and getting athletes like Juice and Kittle on linebackers that they're always going to, the yak is always going to be there for the taking.
Right. And moving on to, the receivers, obviously Brandon Ayuk was a first-round pick a couple years ago. He's somebody that I think the fan base is getting really behind, and feels like, we've seen some flashes where this guy seems like he's going to be an elite receiver. Can you talk what you've seen on tape with Brandon Ayuk and what you see as his ceiling, as far as what kind of receiver he can be and where he would fit in, like as far as top receivers in the league?
I'm kind of wary about placing a ceiling on guys. I always never know how to do that, or never know what a good comp is. I think he's going to be an elite receiver, though. Mm-hmm. Just based on what we've seen last season. I mean, another guy who knows how to get open, can run in space, is a great downfield receiver, which, they didn't really use him a lot downfield because none of the quarterbacks could really throw downfield. But when he was, he did have a few deep passes that he caught, and he was running full speed, wide open, because of what he does at the line of scrimmage and how he understands how to get open. He didn't look as fast to me in college. I think he was kind of hampered by an injury that year, coming out. But you can get the guy the ball at the line of scrimmage, he did this several times at Arizona State, and he's going to take it for a 70-yard pass play, from a screen play, and either score a touchdown or get a huge gain off of it. And that's what he's doing in the NFL. I mean, get the kid in space with the ball, whether it's downfield or whether it's, I think they ran that Debo reverse a couple of times to him, and he's going to make things happen.
Right.
it's just he's just a superior athlete in every possible way against teams that they play. So
How do you like his route running? Because I think sometimes with the way Shanahan utilizes receivers, they tend to be, sometimes they look like glorified running backs because of all the sweeps that they're running, and you're kind of throwing the ball on a quick slant or something, and then it's all yards after the tackle. But can you talk about just him as a pure receiver, what you're seeing as far as route running, his hands, so on and so forth, rather than just being an athlete? Like, what are you seeing as far as technique with him?
He looks like a 5-year veteran running routes with his release off the line. And for proof of this, go watch any snap in the Bills game, the Monday night game. He's just putting, I think it was Trey White in a blender on a lot of those plays, and he's one of the premier defenders in the league. So, it just again, another guy who understands leverage, who understands how to release against certain press techniques. And oftentimes he's going to win that rep. I mean, even if he gets like kind of jammed up, he's still strong enough to, I think, muscle through it. And he did that quite often. Whereas someone like Debo had trouble in college coming out releasing in press coverage. But it was somebody, if you got him in space, could, make things happen. Well, Ayuk is a guy who can get off the jam and press coverage and make things happen in space. So that's where he separates himself from even someone like Debo.
So you consider him wide receiver 1 right now?
Absolutely. There's no question. Like if Shanahan in his mind had like a depth chart of wide receivers, because we kind of know, like, he likes to use them in any position on the field. If he has it in his mind, it's Ayuk. That's his number one guy.
And what are you looking for as far as, in his second season? What are you looking for him to expand on? What's that next step for him as far as being able to unlock? Because I think us as 49er fans really know what we have in Brandon Ayuk. I don't think he's gotten the national kind of praise like a CeeDee Lamb has gotten, or, even some of these guys coming out of the draft this year are, I think, getting more hype than what Brandon Ayuk has done. Obviously, Jefferson in Minnesota had the incredible season he had. But what do we need to see out of Brandon Ayuk? What's the next level for him to be on a national level, one of the top receivers?
Well, it's kind of up to the 49ers there. They need Ayuk. They need to throw to him downfield. I mean, that's where Jefferson made his money, was Kirk Cousins taking shots downfield. Obviously, you're not always going to hit all of them, but they very rarely run Ayuk downfield like that because, Jimmy, Nick, CJ couldn't throw a deep ball like accurately to save their life, and they just never took those shots. The ones
he hasn't really gotten the opportunity to play with a starting quarterback, to be honest. He's been playing with
consistently, right?
Season,
I think he had the one deep ball in the Patriots game that was wide open and Jimmy threw him out of bounds.
Mm-hmm.
The momentum of the ball where he caught it took him out of bounds. That should have been a touchdown. Mullins, in my opinion, had, but that's the thing though, is when they did take deep shots to him on the 3 or 4 that they had, they completed nearly all of them. I mean, he had one in the Saints game that Mullins put out there for him, and he had one in the Bills game that Mullins threw down there for him. Was like the best pass I've ever seen Mullins throw. So when they do get those shots, they're successful, but oftentimes they're not taking those shots for whatever reason, because Shanahan with these quarterbacks isn't a guy that's going to dial up those shot plays very often if he doesn't think he's going to get it. So
I think last season as well. Last season was just the ineptitude of the running game too, because a lot of those deep plays are usually schemed up when the play action is as good as it was, and they didn't have a running game last season. So
they didn't really have it. But that, you can do straight 7-step drop back and just heave the ball downfield and just see what you get. Like, just take the shot. Even if Jimmy starts, let Jimmy air it out. Like, just throw it down to Ayuk and see what happens.
Right.
And more often than not, I think you'll be successful with it. Even if he's wide open, like, it doesn't matter. Just get him the ball, get him downfield and get him the ball any way you can. Like, that's what they need to do. And if they're just going to relegate him to a role like they do with Debo, then it's not going to, he's never going to progress and be the guy that they want.
I agree. We're coming up on the hour mark, Rich. I know you got to get to work. Do you have time for one more question?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, perfect. So this is the one that I think is going to be the spiciest one of the day. So obviously, with the talent that we're talking about, in a guy like Kittle, in a guy like Ayuk, you've talked a lot about their ability to route run and their ability to get downfield and their speed. And I think you kind of hedged saying that, we haven't been able to see them utilized in the right way. And a lot of that's going to come. There's a lot of factors. I think the running game is a big factor because play action is going to play a role in that and help any quarterback play, throw that deep ball better. But now we have Trey Lance. We, gave up 3 first-round picks to get this guy. Seems like you're pretty high on them. Make the case right now to everybody that is looking for Jimmy G to be the day one starter. Why is Trey Lance the solution, and why should he be the starter for the 49ers come week 1?
I just think you know what you have with Jimmy. I think what you see is what you get. Injuries or not, he's never going to be the guy that puts them over the hump. I think in some ways, I think the injury in 2018 hurt Jimmy more than it helped him. And sometimes I wonder if he hadn't gotten hurt in 2018, if that would have just sped up his exit from the 49ers. Because everything since then, it just doesn't seem like he's Shanahan's guy. Everything they've said, everything they've done, at least in this offseason, the Brady rumors,
Deshaun Watson,
being tied to every quarterback under the sun. They're sniffing around everything because they haven't seen him as a long-term solution since 2018. So,
but let's put it this way, Rich, because I kind of want to, obviously the injuries are there, but let's say Jimmy G is healthy, Trey Lance is healthy. From what you've seen on Trey Lance with tape, obviously what you've seen with Jimmy G on tape, you are Kyle Shanahan. Who are you starting week 1 and why?
I'm starting Trey Lance. We've seen what Kyle Shanahan did with a rookie quarterback in Washington. They went 9-7, won the division, and were on the verge of running the Seahawks out of their stadium in the wild card playoff game until RG3 got hurt. I think they were up like 14-0 at halftime, and that was another. If you need more proof of why Shanahan should start a rookie, I mean, Russell Wilson, he was a rookie. And I think they won the division. No, they didn't win the division. The 49ers did, but they another
played
playoff
much
team.
Better with him as a quarterback.
Yeah, they played much better with Russell Wilson as quarterback than they were getting from Matt Flynn in training camp. So
I think even in San Diego, you saw what happened with Herbert. How that offense
even Baker Mayfield showed promise when he started, 3 games into the 2018 season.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of rookies you can point to on lesser teams or coaching staffs that made an impact right away. And so there's no reason to think Lance wouldn't have as much or greater of an impact on the offense.
What do you see in Lance that you don't see in Jimmy G?
Understanding the game a little bit better. And I know he played FCS defenses, whatever. I mean, Lance has the athleticism, and that always translates. It doesn't matter if you're an FCS player or an FBS, Pac-12, SEC, Big 12 player, quarterback, or whatever. It doesn't matter. It all translates. I think he's just more patient. I think he understands. There was a lot of talk about his football knowledge, watching his game tape, and then it comes out like, okay, the 49ers got through the entire install with Trey Lance, during OTAs and whatever, the 1 or 2 weeks that they had, and you're kind of like, that's interesting. We always knew that, he was, talked up as this really smart kid, but damn, they got through the entire install. I mean, that's, that would seem to think he's ahead of schedule. Obviously, it's going to be different when they get him in pads and they get him in preseason games and things like that. But if the kid is understanding more than you thought he was, it's probably time to start looking at him as the starter. And I really think they kind of messed that up a little bit by underrating what he does. And like how they sold him to the fan base as a guy like, yeah, there probably won't be a competition, to now they can't really deny that there's going to be a quarterback competition. So I just think he gives the offense more than Garoppolo does at this point. I mean, they can run the same offense in 2019 with Lance back there, and you get more potential production because of Lance's legs that Jimmy couldn't give, just because he's an immobile quarterback.
Right.
So at a bare minimum, you get 2019's offense with an added running element to it, and you got a team that can probably win 10 or 11 games that way and get into the playoffs with Trey Lance. So he gives the offense, but it's more than just physical ability. Like I said, I mean, he understands the game at a deeper level than he gets credit for. And you can see that in his college tape, how he progresses through his reads. And he wasn't playing in an easy offense. He was playing in a pretty
pro style,
more pro style than most college offenses. And I'm hesitant to use that word, but if we just think of it in terms of under center and having to read defenses and things like that, then yeah, it was a little more pro style than it gets credit for. And you can see all the ways that he's processing the game, from shotgun, from under center, even making simple reads on a zone read, or they run mostly power option, quarterback power option at North Dakota State with him, and you can just see how he processes the game. Now, the flip side of that is he is playing FCS defenses, okay, but I'm not looking at the talent he's playing against, and you can't really do that without looking at the talent he had playing with him, because they weren't very good.
And decision making is decision making, regardless of
if you know how to
the talent.
Yep, and if you know how to make decisions, then that translates. It's the smarter you are in the NFL, the better off you're going to be.
Now, to temper expectations, I know you've gotten deep into his tape. What are some of the critiques that you're seeing in him, or areas where he really needs to focus on to be, a good quarterback in the NFL?
He does need to clean up some of his mechanics. That's the only kind of big concern I have. I mean, he spent the last year and a half cleaning him up with his quarterback coach, whoever he hired. It was Quincy Avery, and then he started working with John Beck. But you never know how that's going to pan out in a game. I mean, everything we've seen suggests it's probably going to be okay. But I'm a little wary and skeptical that quarterbacks meaningfully change their mechanics in the course of their career. I mean, just look at Aaron Rodgers as someone who says he works on footwork every year, every offseason, and he's doesn't have the greatest footwork. I mean, Patrick Mahomes looks like Krusty the Clown on a lot of throws, right, with his footwork, and but for them it works. I mean, they're just great quarterbacks. Great quarterbacks have it no matter what. And Lance, I think, is going to be a very special player. And I don't necessarily think the mechanics are going to hinder him, but if it's, there is a couple things that he really does need to clean up. Like, he has a tendency to drop his hips when he's throwing a deeper pass, like on the windup, where you don't want your quarterback dipping his hips to get the power behind the throw. You want him rotating his hips through the throw. And that's some of the things it looks like he has cleaned up. Whether he does it in a game is a different story.
Right. That's great. So you're on team Lance for the start, right?
Yes. To put it bluntly.
You got, and Pill, I don't know what that name's supposed to be, but they say you're spitting. So I
appreciate that. I don't think I'm that smart at all. There's a lot of things I'm still learning, and I tend to stay away from things that I don't know. So,
well, Rich, I really appreciate you taking the time, man. I really enjoy the X's and O's because that's something that I'm still learning, and being part of this 49er community, I'm gaining a lot more from watching guys like you, Eric Crocker, the guys that come on Grant Cohn's show. But I truly appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me and go over this. Hopefully we could do it again. Sometime. That would be amazing. Anything that you want to end the show with? Anything that you want to plug, Rich? where these guys could find you to get more of your takes and more of your expertise?
Yeah, you just the Twitter handle's posted right there under my face. As far as things that I've published, I haven't written anything since before the draft because I've kind of been burned out from writing, and working. This spring and summer has been kind of busy for me at work, so I just haven't had a lot of time to just sit down and write things. But I'm still publishing. I'm getting back into Niners Nation, so I publish over there. And then if for some reason your viewers are interested in learning about the rules of the game, I write at Football Zebras, and I've actually got an article I'm publishing at Football Zebras this week where I interviewed Mike Person, former 49ers offensive lineman, about a rules change that affects offensive linemen specifically to get his perspective. So
where can they find that article, Rich?
Well, they can't yet. I haven't published it. I'm cleaning it up, and then publishing it probably later this weekend or early next week at Football Zebras in time for camp. But it's just about the low block rule change. And I spoke with Mike Person on the phone for about 30 minutes over the weekend to get his opinion on it and talk some other stuff. So I'll probably be publishing that soon, real soon. And then I'll probably be talking to him again about some scheme changes the 49ers had from 2019 to 2020. And I figured he'd be the perfect guy to talk to you about that. So I'll probably be publishing that over at Niners Nation at some point during training camp.
Beautiful, man. Well, everybody, make sure you follow Rich on Twitter. He is definitely a fun follow if you like spicy takes, and he will go at anybody if they're coming reckless towards him. So thank you once again, Rich, and all of you guys for tuning in today. Once again, keep it so real. We'll see you next time.